Okay, I am thrilled to welcome to the Sasaga podcast, Randy Channell Soei. So, Randy, please tell us who you are and what fascinating things you do.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast, but honestly, I can't because I had to beg to be on your podcast. You didn't ask me, I asked you.
And I
What's
am
up with
so
that?
grateful. I am so grateful. Yeah, when you sent that message, I thought, wow, why didn't I think of this before? So this is going to be a
Exactly.
very, very fun episode. We've got the Sasaga podcast, the audio version. We've also got the YouTube version. So yeah, ready for a lot of fun. So tell us a little bit more about you, Randy.
Well, I came to Japan when Jesus was still a young boy. It was a long time ago. I think it was probably over 30 some years now. I don't really want to calculate. Originally, I came to study the martial arts, as you very well know, as that's where we met, is with the Budo seminar, which is what would you call it? An international seminar that would introduce non-Japanese people to the ways of the Japanese martial arts.
Mhm.
And at that time when I was here, I was wanting to discover a way that would allow me to incorporate the concept of bunburyodo, which is the martial and cultural ways together in unison, I guess, for a better lack of a better translation.
Mhm.
And it's something that I'd learned when I was in Hong Kong. I'd actually lived in Hong Kong prior to coming here, and I was studying Kung Fu, but it was something that I wanted to try to achieve was this cultural and martial balance, if you would. And so to that end, when I first came to Japan, I came for the purpose of studying martial arts, but to balance that yin and yang aspect, I was trying to do something cultural. So I initially started to do calligraphy.
Mhm.
My sensei of kendo was a calligrapher of some repute, and so I studied with him.
Mhm.
And one of the women that I was introduced to was a koto sensei, the long stringed instrument, for those of you who don't know what it is, but apparently have no talent for either. And so it was just by chance that the woman that was living next door to my house, where I was living in Nagano-ken in Matsumoto City, originally was a tea sensei. And so I was lucky to be able to have an experience with her. And it was totally, I mean, even today, I can remember clearly that first experience I had with her. She was a lovely lady, very, very beautiful, just a really elegant, beautiful person, and I really, really enjoyed her. But when I first watched her do the tea, it was so interesting for me to see the connections between tea and the martial arts.
Mhm.
Uh, the way we hold things, the way we move, the way we bow, things like that. And that's not even talking about the Zen connection. But and of course, but she didn't have a martial background. But I mean, I could just see the connections immediately. And of course, any kind of little bit of a historical study on tea, you'll see that, of course, that the tea and the samurai were joined at the hip since its conception, so to speak.
Mhm.
And so for me, it was kind of a natural progression to go from a martial artist to studying the way of tea to balance things. A lot of people look at tea as being a 180 degrees different from the martial arts, but I mean, if we consider the term michi, then there it's connected there too. And
Mhm.
so to that end, I was living in Matsumoto, but I was given the opportunity to join the Urasenke Senmon Gakko here in Kyoto, which is a traditional technical college. I don't know, you could say a technical college is traditional, but it's a technical college that teaches the traditional way of tea.
Mhm.
And so I entered the 3-year program and graduated in 96. And I've
Mhm.
been teaching the way of tea ever since here in Kyoto.
Mhm.
Mm.
Brilliant. And I know you've got a lot to share with us, especially about what we can learn from tea in the corporate world, for example, maybe for entrepreneurs, because many of the podcast listeners and those watching the videos are in those areas. And, maybe they know a little bit about tea, but not very much about tea. So,
No, but it's actually interesting that you bring that up, Helen, is because not even recently, for several years now, I've been doing kind of leadership training courses or presentations and lectures and things like that that try to incorporate the cultural ideologies, the cultural philosophies of certain things. Like, say, for example, I mentioned bunburyodo. Sorry, I'm going on here. To bring together the focus that a lot of people seem to think that Zen has. It's not only Zen, though. I mean, I'm not talking only about Zen, but just this philosophical ideal. The connection to Zen is very strong in a lot of the Japanese traditional arts. And of course, in English these days, we have the term mindfulness, which is a catchphrase for so many different people in so many walks of life. A lot of times actually doing tea gives the person an opportunity to
be calm when dogs are barking. Yeah.
Fell right next door, and so they're barking at that. And so gives them an opportunity to escape that kind of a high pressure job that they're in, just to be in the moment, so to speak, and to have their time concentrated on preparing a bowl of tea. And so that really plays into it. And so oftentimes, like I said, I'm sometimes just asked to give a presentation on tea, just the tea itself, sometimes to speak about those ideals. But yeah, so I think it's interesting in both the corporate world and, of course, in your everyday life to strive for these ideals.
Well, also, like you mentioned, yin and yang, and the way I see it, a lot of like the corporate world, like, my experience living in Japan for over 30 years as well. I mean, we've basically known each other for 30 years, I believe. And there's in a sense, it's very yang in my mind, the corporate work world, entrepreneurship, because you're always like, you're on the go. And so that idea of balancing with the yin, I think is great. So I'm really interested to know more about that.
Well, and that's actually kind of why I mentioned the bunburyodo, because of course these days it's not so much based towards martial arts. You see a lot of schools, a lot of people will pick it up as scholarly and athletics, athletic being the bu and scholarly being the boon. And so even in the corporate world, it doesn't mean that you have to do like some form of martial art or something like that to get a balance, but just to, in your own personal life as well, just to have that academic / thoughtful balance with a physical, mobility at, at a layman's level. Other than that, like a gym or something, and everybody understands, I'm sure, the need to have a physical and a mental balance. And I think that's kind of what bunburyodo, or even the yin and yang side of that, would kind of concrete to be to show strongly those ideals.
So I think you've got some slides for us to
yes,
share.
I do. If you don't mind, I can cut over to a keynote lecture and kind of talk about a little bit of what we've just gone through on the ideals of tea, and actually its introduction to tea, the ideals of the way of tea. And I'll pop that up if you don't mind. So like I said, I want to just kind of explain. In Japanese, you'll often hear the term sado to mean the way of tea. Probably the majority of people will say sado, but for myself and the tradition I belong to, we refer to it as chado. So the actual literal way of tea. And so it is, like I said, a way of ideals. And I'm just putting these pictures up right now. Of course, the people that are just listening aren't being able to see them, but what I do have is I have 4 pictures up on the screen, and one is of the previous Grand Master of the Urasenke tradition, the 15th generation Hounsai. He's 100 years old this year, and still very, very genki, very, very, what would you say, energetic to a degree that's unbelievable for a person of 100. I just met him last week, and he is just unbelievable. Very lucid, very, very proper posture, walks quickly, just amazing man. And then his son, who is the current Grandmaster Zabosai. Then I have a picture of a gate. And the reason I put that in is that it's similar to anything that you start in Japanese culture or Japanese tradition. It's called nyumon.
Yeah.
And so this is literally entering through that gate and all going on that path to start. That first step is the most important step to take.
Yeah.
And I always pop that up and give them a quick thank you. And so I did a little bit of a self-introduction, but here I'm putting up, there are 3 kind of aspects to what I do. Is there's me as a tea master, me as a martial artist, but
Yeah.
I have to be honest, that's kind of like a past tense thing. And then me, the owner of Ranhote, and Ranhote is a shop slash gallery slash tea experience, tea location place that I own here in Kyoto.
Yeah, and I might just jump in with a few words about that, because I've experienced the tea experience in English at Ranhote, and it is brilliant. So I want to recommend to anyone who's visiting Kyoto, definitely get in touch with Randy Channell Soei and have that experience. It's calming, it's educational, and it's highly entertaining.
Thank you for the words of praise. So hopefully anybody that does come by, you'll find the same kind of feeling as Helen had. And so now I just put up 3 pictures of me, one doing tea, one cutting a makiwara. Actually, 2 of them doing tea. One of them is actually in the shop that we just mentioned, where you have your tea experience. I use tables and chairs, so you don't have to worry about sitting on your knees and seiza like I'm doing in the other picture.
Yeah, my husband was thrilled that he didn't have to sit in seiza when he was doing that experience as well.
So then I move on, and I want to say about tea. Like, so what is tea? I'll talk about that, and then I'll give a brief history and its influence on other Japanese cultural arts, which is very important in the grand scheme of things. And then finally, I'll talk about what we would consider the 4 principles. But we'll start off with what we call the 7 rules of Rikyu.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these were written, to be honest, they were probably written after Rikyu's time, but I'm sorry, this is a different one I'm thinking about. The poem, 100 Poems of Rikyu, were written after Rikyu, but these are by Rikyu, and it's the first one is make good tea.
Mm-hmm.
And now, oftentimes when I'm doing a lecture or a presentation or a training course, I bring these 7 rules to the front because they're very, very important. And even though they were written 500 years ago and they do pertain to tea, with just a little bit of imagination, these 7 rules can be moved into any kind of a corporate undertaking. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, make good tea, it's simple. I mean, if you're making anything, a product or a service, of course, you want to make it good. They're kind of natural, to be honest. And then lay the charcoal so it boils the water. Mm-hmm. And so that could mean, like, well, you can't do tea without hot water. And so, like with a regular business or anything, you need a foundation from which to start. And so your foundation has to be strong. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why the pyramids are shaped like they are. Mm-hmm. And so the next one is the flowers should be as there are in the fields. So this is just kind of like things should be natural. You know, you don't want to force too much. Of course, there are entities and things like that things are forced, but even then it becomes an unnatural thing. And the next one also kind of follows that of naturalness. In summer, suggests coolness, and in winter, warmth. And so in the way of tea, we do this by, like, say, for example, it's cold now, so I would use a tea bowl that's a little bit taller and cylindrical to keep the heat in more, you know. And then in the summer, I'd use a wide bowl that lets the heat dissipate more quickly. And you can use other things like, in the summer, running water kind of ideas and patterns that kind of suggest a sushige, a coolness, if you would. And so, again, in the corporate world, these things would be something that you could easily put into any other kind of concept. You can actually have your listeners think about things and maybe give you comments as to what they could think. This rule is really interesting. It could apply to something like this.
Yeah. Well, when I hear that as well, it sounds like again the theme of balance.
Yes, exactly. We'll cover that, like the bunburyodo, the yin and yang. Mm-hmm. You know, it's definitely this balance is what you need for sure. Mm-hmm. And the next one, of course, is very general. It shouldn't be for everything. Be early for the appointed time. You know, I mean, that's just kind of common sense, like a lot of these rules are, but sometimes they need to be said.
Well, you know, it's interesting you say that that's common sense, because I see this increasingly, and I'm going to kind of call out some of my clients maybe a little bit here, but I notice in the particularly busy corporations that there is actually a lack of respect for people's time. And Very often people arriving late for meetings. And, I've seen this as well in a situation where it's the client, it's the corporate person showing up late for their client meeting.
Oh my God. I can't conceive of that. That for tea is the absolute worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
The absolute worst thing. Because if we take a tea in the formal gathering instance, if you come 5-10 minutes late, that throws the whole thing off, because they've already started for that time. And so the food will be off, everything will be off. It's just unbelievable.
And sadly, it's often it's the people who become more senior, because they've become, it's probably not that they're doing it with a kind of bad intention, but they've become so busy, they're so back-to-back meetings that they end up arriving late. So that's I think that's a great one to highlight as well.
Yeah. So like for us in tea, it's generally almost even 20 minutes early at some point.
Yeah.
And which is really a lot. But I mean, you have to allow for different things. And of course, nobody's maliciously being late. I mean, of course, some people maybe do to make an entrance, but I mean, you know what I'm saying is that generally people want that. But like you said, with things that are as they are now, and how many people are so busy going from one thing to another and having multiple meetings in a day and things like that, sometimes it's unavoidable for sure. Yeah. The next one, of course, again, is prepare for rain regardless.
Oh, that's great.
Isn't that nice? That's just, and again, somewhat, you would think common sense. It doesn't mean that you always have to have an umbrella, but it's not bad to have one in your bag somewhere.
Right.
But for me, it's just I'm prepared to get wet, so it's okay.
Well, what comes to my mind straight away with that one is like giving presentations. So, a lot of people get very nervous about giving their presentations, and they want to have everything, their slides ready and all of that. And being ready for what if the slides don't work? And I've had that situation. I was on an overseas business trip giving a presentation, and the slides weren't working. I said, it's okay, we've got the handouts. And then like, the handouts haven't been delivered. All right, no worries, because I know my stuff. We'll just do it anyway. It turned out they got the slides working, the handouts came, but I was prepared for the rain regardless.
Yes, that's a very good way to look at it, because definitely there's a phrase in Japanese called hataraki, which I guess in English we could say improvise. Like, say for example, if I'm doing something, here's an example. When I show you later, I'm actually going to serve tea to your guests, hopefully just by sound, and for the ones on YouTube by sight. But there's a white linen cloth in the tea bowl that we use to wipe the cloth. And one time I went to a presentation and I forgot it. And a very specific white cloth. It's like, oh, you don't happen to have a chakin, do you? And so what I used was a paper towel, and nobody was the wiser. So I just put it up in the exact same way. So interesting. Or at least I hope nobody was the wiser. Maybe they were just being polite and not razzing me for it.
Maybe.
And then, so the next one is something that I think resonates with everyone. Be considerate of the other guests.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't even think that needs to have any explanation. But of course, the way things are now, and the way respect is given / taken / not given, kind of, I think it will come into that. I'll go over the 4 principles towards the end, and you'll see at the end about a little bit more about that. But definitely, I think that's something that everybody has in their heart, is to be considerate of other people. It doesn't just mean guests; it just means everyone.
And I would say again with that, it's a really, really great reminder to have this, because again, when people start to get busy, in fact, I was having this conversation with somebody just the other day about how she got very busy with her work, and she didn't realize how much of a negative impact she was having on her colleagues. So that's something to
definitely, because that consideration is all encompassing. It's not just meaning, oh, excuse me for going before you and things like this. It's something that maybe, like you just said, it was something that she wasn't aware of, but had she considered it, then it would have come to the front.
Yeah.
And so to kind of finish up what tea is, simplistically, you could say that it's just boiling water, making tea, and sharing it with others. Realistically, it's a traditional Japanese cultural art practiced by many people around the world. And then, of course, idealistically, it's a complete cultural art form that encompasses social, philosophical, spiritual, and aesthetic elements.
Wow.
So these all come into play in the way of tea. And of course, this is a very, very brief, even the whole podcast is only 30, 40 minutes, whatever. And tea, of course, is something that's hundreds of years old. So this, I can't even say that this is tea in a nutshell. It doesn't even touch the tip of the iceberg, so to speak.
Right, right.
And so a brief history, don't want to dwell on it, but we'll pick up some points. Of course, it was brought over from China in the 9th century. They're probably, actually even before that, but they were probably generic plants, but they weren't made as tea at that time. And so the 13th century is when it was brought over in the form that we know today. In the Sung Dynasty in China, I don't remember if it was north or south, I'm sorry. There was a short window of time where they actually drank powdered tea like matcha, but they soon, that tradition passed out. But here in Japan, they've continued it. And so in the 14th century, it was beginning to spread. There were a lot of tasting competitions and things like that. I say held among the underclass. I'm going to say upper class. I think I made a spelling mistake there. And then in the 16th century, Sen no Rikyu became prominent. Of course, now, even if you don't do tea, if you're raised in Japan, you will know who Sen no Rikyu is. He's a very prominent historical figure in Japanese history. And so, but he is connected, of course, to the world of tea. And then from the 16th century, around the same time, Sen no Rikyu, of course, is famous as being the tea lord to the warriors like Oda Nobunaga and Hideyoshi and things like that. So it became popular with the warrior class as well. And then 18th, 19th centuries, it started to flourish. And actually, I say here among the wealthy, but here's when it actually started to go out to the townspeople as well. And then on the foreign side, in 1906, was the Book of Tea was published. That book is, I don't know how many copies now. It's just sold millions and millions of copies, not like my book.
Which we'll also link to in the show notes so that it can sell millions of copies now.
With all your millions of followers, thank you so much. And so around that time, of course, women became more prominent in the way of tea. Prior to that, and it was introduced to the school curriculum, but prior to that, it was probably a man's world, right? And even today, the Grand Masters are all men. But if you think of tea from an outside perspective, probably you're looking at 90% or more of the population of people practicing, teaching tea are women. And so that was a big stepping point. And in 51, it was first overseas branch was opened in Hawaii. And in 70 is when we saw the first, what would you say, a non-Japanese group was set up at the headquarters here in Kyoto. And that's part of the group that I belong to called Midori-kai. And so part of the focus, I mentioned my book earlier, but part of the focus of my book was talking about the connection of tea to other Japanese cultural arts. And this is what I want to introduce in this section. So this slide will show a few pictures of the first picture that comes up is a geiko. Yeah. The geiko and maiko, of course, are very prominent figures for promoting Japanese cultural arts. And of course, tea is one of them. I'm often put together with geiko and maiko, oftentimes showing them how to do tea properly. And things like that. But it's, because they're the actual kanji, the child of the arts, if you would. So they're very, very professional young girls and women that are doing all sorts of different kinds of cultural arts, like shamisen, singing, dancing, tea ceremony, things like that. Very, very interesting. The world of that world now is kind of disappearing quite quickly because it's a very difficult world to enter.
Yeah.
And then next slide I'm bringing up shows a tray of a traditional Japanese meal served at a formal gathering of tea. And so the kaiseki in Japanese is called kaiseki. The kaiseki has been very strongly influenced by the way of tea, and vice versa for that matter as well. And then next I'm showing a tea bowl. And so ceramics come into play with the world of tea. Architecture. In the next picture, I have a picture of the Konichian room in Urasenke. And then the next picture shows lacquerware. I mean, even lacquerware in history, the term or the word Japan it means lacquer in English.
Right. Yeah.
And so you can see even back 400, 500 years ago when there was people coming for the first time into Japan from overseas, the lacquer was at a very high level of skill. And this particular piece that I'm showing is very, very brilliantly done with, what is it, a yanagi, willow tree, very intricately done with gold. And then ironwork. So, I mean, in the way of tea, we have what we refer to as the Senke Jushoku, which are the 10 craft families of Urasenke. And they deal with several of these things, as well as like things like bamboo work and scroll mounting and things like this. So the influence of Japanese tea, or the traditional Japanese way of the tea, or the tea ceremony, or chado, sado, chanoyu, whatever you want to call it, is very strong. I mean, even terms like mucha and things like that are come from the way of tea. And so here are the ideals of tea, as I'm going to mention them earlier. These are what we refer to as Rikyu's 4 principles. Earlier we talked about the 7 rules. They're put together. Normally it's the shikisoku, the 4 principles and the 7 rules, but I kind of turned them around for the lecture today. But generally speaking, these 4 principles are what everyone strives for in the way of tea. In Japanese, from left to right, they read wake, sei, jaku. In English, we translate them as harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility. And so these points are interesting in the fact that, say, for example, if you were to attend a formal gathering of tea, you would try to achieve the first 3, harmony, respect, and purity, to be able to achieve a state of tranquility. I find that the term tranquility in English is easier maybe for people to envision than Japanese people trying to envision jaku. And so it's interesting. These points that were written by Rikyu around 500 years ago were valid, of course, at that time. They're valid today, and they'll be valid in 500 years from today. So it kind of shows the timelessness of the philosophy of the way of tea. Okay, sei, jaku. And so, I go on to explain them, but it's a little bit involved for what we need. Just taking them for what they are. The harmony, of course, is harmony between guests and hosts, and between the seasons and things like that. And respect, same thing. You respect the people that you're with, and of course you respect the utensils and everything like that. So they all kind of play into each other. Purity, of course, is something that when I'm doing the tea here for you, lady, you'll see where you purify things, and it's purity of mind and heart as well that come into play. And then the term jaku, or tranquility, is where you're actually able to kind of ascend these feelings and maybe reflect on yourself, if you would.
I love as well how, we can so easily apply all this again to the corporate or entrepreneurial world. They're all really, really great reminders. So again,
Yes.
pop these in the show notes as well.
Yeah, it's definitely, like I said, they're universal truths, if you would.
Yeah.
And here we have 3 more that I want to show you. For those that are listening, I've just brought up a screen that shows 3 Chinese characters reading from left to right: do gaku jitsu, do gaku jitsu. And so do meaning the way, gaku to study, and jitsu actuality or reality, if you would. And so these 3 characters hang at the entranceway to the school that I attended. And so every day that I would enter the school, I would pass by these 3 characters. In Japanese martial arts, we have a phrase called shu ha ri, and I guess it's kind of similar to this, is where you actually learn to first your desire to enter the way, to start to study, and then the actual starting of the study, and then learning, and then you kind of break things down and you're able to actually put it into a realistic sense. So these dogaku jitsu are terms that are of same, as you mentioned, with the corporate world or entrepreneurial world, are very important, because you start with an idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like Kickstarter. You're starting with something and then you're putting it together, and then you're actually getting it out and about. So these traditional phrases that were written hundreds and hundreds of years ago are still very, very valid in today's world.
Absolutely. And I even, I can recall one of the McKinsey partners from years and years ago. And I clearly remember him saying about learning, best practice for structuring your communication. And he said, it's so important that you learn those foundations and then you apply it in a realistic way for your situation. It's exactly the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. And there is, like I mentioned earlier, a connection of Zen here. Of course, Zen is a topic that's much too long to go into in detail with this particular podcast. But the martial arts that we've spoken of, and tea ceremony, of course, and other traditional Japanese cultural arts are steeped in Zen. So much so that in tea, even stronger than Budo, which is very interesting because I would have thought Budo had a strong connection. But if you think of it, the actual tea comes through legend from the Dharma's eyelids, where he rips his eyelids off and throws them to the ground. They grow up as tea plants. But
I didn't know this. This is
yeah.
What?
It gives you some homework for later.
Oh
He's so angry at himself for falling asleep and stuff. So.
Wow.
And so the connection there is very strong. And in Japanese tea and the way of tea, where there's a phrase, a Zen phrase, and it's chazen ichimi. Chazen ichimi. What that means is Zen and tea are of one flavor or one taste. So they're inseparable, if you would. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of a strong point. But to give you some idea of that, in the tea rooms, you will hang scrolls that are written by monks and abbots and tea masters. And oftentimes, like the first scroll that I'm putting up on screen now for the listeners is one that's written by a monk from, I'm sorry, I can't read it. I'm assuming a Daitokuji, Zen Daitokuji. And it reads, Jikishin Koredo, Jikishin Koredo. And then the next one is Kumono Mushin, Kumono Mushin. That's actually by the current Grand Master, Urasenke. And then one of my favorite phrases, and of course probably Helen likes this phrase at all, it's very prominent in the world of martial arts, is Zanshin. Nokori no kokoro. So if you look at that, you can see that's lots of heart. And so the slide that I just popped up is actually, it says that lots of, and then it has a heart mark with explanations for those people that are listening. And so it's kind of at the base of it. I mean, the whole, I'm often asked what's the most important point of tea, and I say it's what we're doing right now. It's this interaction, even though we're not doing tea, it's an interaction of people between people and people. Mm-hmm. The connection of people. Shitono dei. This is important. And so the heart of it is the most important. And of course, nothing shows the heart better than these terms. And so we come to where I'm going to close off a little bit here. We have the term that I just put up now is ichigo ichie. And in Japanese, the Japanese people understand it to a degree, I guess. But the way that I like to explain it to non-Japanese people, and of course, Helen mentioned earlier before we started the podcast, this next phrase that I use is called a Kodak moment. And so a lot of people don't really remember the reference to a Kodak moment. It was back in the day, they used to have a TV commercial or just magazine commercials from the film company Kodak. And so you would take a picture, you would capture that moment, and that you couldn't recreate that moment again. It's like today we're doing this podcast. If we do the podcast again tomorrow, and I do exactly the same thing, even with the dogs barking in the background, we can't catch the moment that we're sharing together right now. And so these are important, a very important element of the way of tea, and again, an important element of every meeting. One opportunity, one life, a chance, once in a lifetime opportunity, as it's often translated to. And so I think it's very important that we kind of keep remembering that truly there is no past other than to learn from, and there is no future that we can see. We're all truly all only living in the moment. And so I think that's an important point as well. But
the mindfulness that you mentioned earlier as well, and just really remembering to be present in your busy work day as well.
And so I close with a smile because, like I said, that's what shows everything. Everybody in every culture, the smile is the same. There's no cultures frown when they're smiling. So all cultures smile in the same fashion. And so hopefully we can all smile at the end of the day. Before I start my tea, actual presentation of tea, to serve tea to all of you, which I will drink as the representative because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know how to serve the tea through the screen yet. But do you have any questions or anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, no, I love it. I'm very excited that we're kind of doing I don't know if this has ever been done in the world before, to serve tea on a podcast. So I love this, the ingenuity of it. It's definitely Ichigo Ichie kind of experience as well.
Exactly. So what I have set in front of me for those of you that are listening is, let me see if I can push some things out of the way here and get a little bit different angle for you. How's that? Let's go there. I have a tray sitting in front of me, and on the tray, I have a bowl and I have a container for tea. In the bowl, I have a chakin, a chasen, and a chachaku. For those of you not familiar with the way of tea, those are the implements that are used for everything. This particular procedure is one that I teach online in Zoom, and you can see that it doesn't really take anything. You need a hot water implement. It doesn't have to be a tetsubin. Oftentimes I use just a thermos.
Mm-hmm.
And you need a container to pour the water that you've used into. Mm-hmm. And then other than that, like I said, it's a tray, it's a container for the tea, a tea scoop with a folding cloth to wipe, and a whisk and a bowl, and you're set to go. So you don't need a tea room. You can do it on tables and chairs. We're using tables and chairs. You can do it in a tea room. There's absolutely no way to dictate how to do it. Actually, the students that I'm working with, one woman in Australia, she actually has one tatami that she's put in the room. The other couple that I'm working with in Austria, they do it on their carpet. And so it's like another person does it on table and chairs. So like there's absolutely no, no guide, no rules, set rules other than serving tea to somebody. So let me start. And
great. I because I always had the impression that you have to do things, everything in a certain way. But what you're saying is you can, do what works for you.
Exactly. And so I've just taken a silk cloth off my obi, and what I'm doing is I'm folding this cloth to be able to purify the utensils that I'm using. And so first I fold the cloth. I'll just kind of hold this here so you can see it. Normally I can still see it here. You purify the container that holds the tea, and then you refold the cloth.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, you purify the tea scoop.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, all of these movements are done in a prescribed fashion, so there's not really room for improvisation there. Mm-hmm. And then take out the tea whisk, and then take out the wiping cloth. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm doing the purification, it's said to be that I'm polishing my own character. Mm-hmm. If many of you noticed on the YouTube that I'm completely bald, skinhead. So in some places I polish too much, I guess. And so next, using hot water, what we do is we purify the tea bowl and the tea whisk. So this has a practical side as well. By putting hot water in the bowl, it warms the bowl up. And then, of course, introducing the whisk to the hot water softens the tines so that I'm able to whisk a nice fresh bowl of tea for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm doing this, the people that are watching on YouTube, you can see, well, actually, I'll explain to the people that are listening as well. The utensils that I've selected, I did mention that they're a tray, a tea container, a tea whisk, a tea scoop, a wiping cloth, a tea bowl, and a container to pour the hot water out into or they used water into. The selection I've chosen today are quite interesting in the fact that the tray is from Firenze, Italy. And the container of tea is a Canadian piece made by the indigenous people. Is that a correct political term these days? From Canada on the west coast, the Haida. And the tea bowl I selected specifically for Helen today. This was made by Luc Fouché.
Oh, wow.
I thought you'd get a kick out of that.
So for listeners, Luke is also a martial artist that who I met many years ago as well. Who also he took up pottery as well, right?
Yes. And then the piece on the side that's blue and white is from Thailand. So the world of tea is very diverse. Onset, even back in Miku's time, he had a Portuguese student. And so the world of tea, especially these days with the term diversity being quite as strong as it is, with it's the tea world is very much in line with that from centuries ago, and same with SDGs and things like that. And so it's very, very easy to see a connection in modern corporate world with the traditional way of tea. And so there you have a lovely bowl of tea. Can you see that?
I can see that, and I want to reach through the screen and I want to drink the tea.
Okay, well, what we'll do then is I'll turn it up here like this. I'll show you as I'm drinking. So actually, this would be interesting for the guests because a lot of people probably don't know the proper etiquette involved in drinking tea. Some of them probably study it, but at any rate, what you would do is you would bow. As a first guest, you would bow to the second guest and say "Osaki ni," of course. But and all the other guests, out of deference to the first guest, they put the bowl down between them and the guest that had tea before them, and they would say "Oshoba ni tashimasu." And then to the guest that hasn't had tea, "Osaki ni." And then to the person that made the tea, "Otemai chodai itashimasu." So it's just you're thanking the person for the tea, for the whole event, actually, not just making the tea. And so what you do is you think of the bowl as a clock, and you pick the bowl up at 3 o'clock with your right thumb, and then you set it on your left palm. Actually, let me turn the camera down just a bit. Don't need this. And so you pick it up like this, and then you put it in your left palm. And we hold it back like this, so your thumb is back facing you. This is the Urasenke style. Some styles hold it like this and things. It's not important, just as long as you're holding the bowl safely, if you would. And here, what is important is you make a slight bow of respect. And then, again, out of respect and humbleness, you turn the bowl clockwise twice. The reason we do this is to avoid drinking from the front that the host has selected to prepare for you. And so then what you do is you take the first sip. The first sip should be an audible slurping sound. And then the other sips, they don't sound or not is not important. But the last sip, you should be slurping it up good to the last drop, so to speak. But let me just go for it. So I'll turn the bowl back, make a slight bow of respect, turn it once, twice, and start. And so you don't drink it like beer where you're chugging it all back. You enjoy each sip as it goes down. We say in Japanese, mikuchi-han, so about 3.5 sips. And then you kind of let the tea pool towards the end, and then suck it up. And then you wipe it from, like, say, where your lips were on the bowl, from, say, 7 to 5 with your thumb and your index finger. 8 to 4 if you have a big mouth. 9 to 3 if you're really big. And then you can just wipe your fingers on the kimono of the person sitting next to you. Don't do that. Turn the bowl back counterclockwise. And so the front of the bowl is something that is quite important. And it's something that not only the bowl, a lot of Japanese pieces have a front. We say in Japanese, shomen. And so in the world of tea, these are points that are very strongly protected. And so when you're turning the bowl, you're turning it in a fashion to avoid drinking from the front. And then after you've finished drinking, you make sure you turn it back. And so from here, we go into the cleanup phase, because you just don't want to leave something sitting on the table like this. You want to put things back into the way they were. And so at this point, the principal guest would bow and say, please close now. Dozo shimayo. I put the bowl down and say, shimai teshimasu. So what this does is just gives the procedure closure and brings everything back into its original position. Okay, and we're back at a different angle, but it'll work.
That is so great. And again, you know, there's so many lessons here, that the part of, as you said, the cleaning up. It's like not just the experience itself, but cleaning up, and that's something again that you can take into the corporate and entrepreneurial world.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. That's, like I said, the curriculum of the Way of Tea is really, really well defined and very applicable to so many different walks of life that it's quite interesting.
I love it. Wow. So it's just I feel inspired. I feel very inspired.
You want to start studying the Way of Tea?
It has crossed my mind. It has crossed my mind. Absolutely. I was going to say as well, what else you want to share, but what I am thinking though is, because I know that you have teas, you have your own teas,
Yes.
and we can link to that in the show notes as well, because I'm thinking after this, it's about time I ordered some tea from you as well.
I would think so. And like I said earlier, any of your savvy entrepreneur corporate entities that want to promote my teas, they're 100% original tea from Kyoto, and all very high quality. So please hit me up.
Lovely. Wonderful. What else would you like to, apart from that little request there, what else would you like to share with our Sasuga podcast listeners and viewers today?
I think, like you said, we covered quite a few of the points that maybe you wanted to ask and that I wanted to talk about throughout the podcast. And so I guess the major thing is just let's go back to the 7 rules and the 4 principles. I mean, if you can kind of put those into what would you say, an everyday usage? Yeah, then you'll find that things are going to be a little bit better. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea. I'm thinking, you know, even just popping on a post-it note and having those as a reminder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, for me, of course, it's something that I do every day now, and it should be ingrained. Even when I find myself yelling at my students, I'm doing it with lots of heart. And so I know Michi.
Right.
But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, a lot of it really is common sense. But like you said, a lot of the what we would have thought of as common sense these days is kind of falling by the wayside.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I understand the times they are changing, but still, there are universal truths that shouldn't have any bearing on time.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think, just keeping these points in mind is a good start. And what I failed to mention maybe earlier is we talked about it, and what is the Way of Tea is like. I mentioned that tea is this, what we're doing right here without doing tea, but here we just did tea. So what it is about is this sharing the moment, this Kodak moment. But it's like, say, for example, if I get up every day, I put my kimono on, I come up here and I make myself a bowl of tea. That's not tea. Tea is me having the desire to make the best bowl of tea that I can for you. And you partaking of the tea with gratitude and respect. And so that's what tea is about, is this sharing between people. And the previous grandmaster, the gentleman that I showed at the beginning, who's 100 years old this year, he's been traveling around the world relentlessly for over 50 years, promoting, in Japanese we say ichiwan kara, peacefulness, so peace through a bowl of tea. And so what that means is if we're all sitting in a small 4.5 mat tea room drinking tea, we're not going to be at each other's throats, you know.
Right.
So just take that time to reflect and to think about things that are positive as opposed to negative. It's always very easy to come up with something negative. Sometimes it's difficult to think of something positive. It's like they used to say, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything.
Yep.
And of course, sometimes things have to be said, but I mean, generally speaking, it's just, isn't it nice? Isn't it nice to be nice?
Yeah.
That kind of a concept.
I love it. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. So we'll be linking in the show notes. As I said earlier, I wholeheartedly, there's the heart again, wholeheartedly recommend anybody who's visiting Kyoto to go and experience tea in person with Randy. You can order the tea if you're looking for those online classes. It's a possibility. So many possibilities for you.
Endless.
All right. Thank you so much, Randy. Really
Thank you very much.